Welcome to Connecting to Admired Leadership, where twice a month we explore the behaviors and routines that make great leaders extraordinary. I'm Wes Bender, and I have the distinct pleasure of hosting some of our firm's partners, coaches, and clients to discuss leadership in ways you won't hear anywhere else. Let's dive into this episode and make people and situations better together. We've got a brand new guest we've never had on our series before. David is with us, so definitely want to give him a good impression of who's on the call today, and we can, of course, tailor some of our comments at times and things too. David, let's go ahead and jump in. I would love for everybody to get to know you a bit. You are newer to our firm. You are a huge veteran to leadership development as a whole and your experience and those kind of things. You have added some of the most immense value to our firm just right
Thank you,
off the
Wes.
bat in coming in. I especially remember, you didn't know I was going to share all this, but I especially remember when you were just feeling out our firm at one of our firm meetings, and we were kind of feeling out, or our firm was feeling out you, looking for that great fit. Randall, one of our co-managing partners, interviewed you, or you interviewed him
Yeah.
and asked him some really pointed questions. And it was there in that moment that I thought, man, this guy would be an incredible asset to what we do, and that's certainly been the case ever since then. So just give everyone an impression as we start out. Any new guests, I always ask, who are you, and what do you love about what you do?
Wow. Well, thanks a lot. It's a pleasure to be here with everybody. Happy Friday. Thanks for the invitation, Wes. It's truly a pleasure. Looking forward to engaging with everybody. I'm in the DC metro area. I'm originally from Philadelphia. Go Eagles. What most important in my life is helping others, right? Mentoring, coaching, just helping people kind of get better than they were yesterday. That's always been just kind of my mantra. I started my career, and we're going to talk a little bit about it in U.S. Navy. I went to the U.S. Naval Academy, spent 10 years as an officer in the Navy. And, just what I learned about leadership and really, truly being a leader and giving back to others, and being of service, is what's truly important to me. In my family, we've been huge volunteers forever. We live about 20 miles south of the U.S. Naval Academy now, so we sponsor midshipmen, and we're very much engaged. And so that's kind of my life. I got 3 kids, 3 grandkids, so I get to engage that way, which is probably the biggest joy in my life. But other than that, being able to coach everybody coach people on a daily basis, it gives me joy. That's truly what drives me.
So, we often say on this webinar, and we say at Admire Leadership, that leadership is what you do. And
Hmm.
I bet there's plenty of people out there who would say, I love to serve people, I love to coach people, I love to lift people up, and those kind of things. But it's neat when you hear that from people, and you can absolutely attest to that intent showing through in what they do. And for those of you who have never met David before, he is one of the most intense individuals that I've ever been around, but it's an intensity of curiosity. He really wants to know. He asks great questions when he and I sit down to meals at our firm meetings and things. He asks great questions. He wants to get to know you because he really wants to serve you better based on that, and really customize that approach was incredible. The other thing I know about David is he is one of the best storytellers. Somebody told me
Yeah.
one time that great storytellers combine two things. They combine really intriguing, interesting experiences, right? They have real life stories that they've been a part of, and they have an uncanny way of lifting up just the right details of that story to give you something. There's people who can lift up details, but their experiences are not very interesting. There's people who have very interesting stories, and you want them to be great storytellers, but when they say it, you get bored at the same time. And David has a very unique way. He's got incredible stories from his time with the Navy and those kind of things. In order to show you that, I'm gonna have Sophie. Sophie, if you would go ahead and drop in the field note that is going to be the driver for this conversation. Thank you. If you haven't subscribed to Field Notes, obviously we'd love for you to do that. That's where a lot of these conversations come from. Those are those daily pieces that fall into your inbox, very practical wisdom pieces. Usually we start out the conversation and I have the guest just frame up that field note or that topic that we're on. I was chatting with David yesterday, and he immediately, of course, jumped into stories, and I was engaged. So I asked David instead of framing up with the field note, I wondered if you would just share with us maybe a couple stories that come top
Sure.
of mind when you think about this topic, learning to respond instead of reacting. So the
Well,
floor
no,
is
that's
yours
great, Russ.
for a couple
Yeah, so I've
stories.
got two. One where if you think about just the context of responding instead of reacting, one story is when I got it completely wrong, and another is where one of the most influential leaders in my entire career got it right, relating to a screw up that I made. And
Mm,
it's the contrast between those two that illustrates exactly what we're talking about today. So we're going to talk about the first one, which is when I was a Navy public affairs officer back in the mid 90s. So I started my career in the Navy, spent time on a ship, went to Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm, but then I switched my career for my last 5 years to be a Navy public affairs officer. Job of Navy PAO is to tell the Navy story, both from a power projection and confidence perspective, telling the world how strong U.S. military is, and the other is for recruiting, obviously.
mhm,
And so I'm stationed in the Pentagon and on the office of the Navy Office of Information, on the Navy News Desk, fielding global media inquiries on a daily basis. But then I was lucky enough to get selected by the two-star admiral who ran Navy Public Affairs to become his flag lieutenant and aide. And so I went to the front office for a year and a half. And one of actually the best job I ever had, just in terms of access to senior leadership. His two bosses in the Navy were the civilian Secretary of the Navy, so, presidential appointee, and the four-star admiral, the chief of naval operations, who runs all Navy operations. Every year, the chief of naval operations hosts a four-star conference. So all the active duty four stars come back to the Pentagon for 3 days for a conference, and all the retired four stars from around the world come back as well to get an update on the Navy and see what's going on. Well, this is the mid 90s, right? So, we're telling stories, and this is before we had digital media and computers and being able to use your cell phone and all those things. So the way we would record was use VHS tapes. And because, we had frequent updates to stories, we would use local news media, national news media to tell the Navy story. So as part of a 1 hour pitch that the Admiral always gave, I had a series of between 5 and 9 tapes that would have different, stories, from local news and those types of things. And we would, change the order. And what we would do was just, use that for the basis of his presentation. Well, my job as his aide was to go recon the room every time we went through to make sure that I teed up the right spot in the VHS. Now, those of you who remember how VHS was, where to operate, kind of hard depending on the type of VHS machine you had, et cetera. Well, the layout of this room where there's going to be about 25 to 30, active duty and retired four-star admirals in the room, one two-star admiral, and one Navy lieutenant, equivalent of a captain in the Marine Corps. And that's me. And so I go up, I recount the room, and you've got to remember this is the mid 90s. So they brought this old archaic 80s television, one of those big old, tube-based TVs with an old archaic VHS machine on the stand. And so based on where the four-star, the chief of naval operations was sitting, I couldn't get direct access to the machine. And so there was a remote control. So I worked it out so that I could put the tape in, go sit down, push the play, and I was going to do that cadence, and I had it all set up. So I go away, I take my tapes with me, and I go back. Wait for the admiral now to go, a couple hours later to give his presentation. Well, by the time I get back in the room and it's filled with four stars, and my two-star gets up to speak, they change the configuration, and the remote is nowhere to be found. Outside of the room are all the other aides and the executive assistants and the chiefs of staff for the active four stars. So I go outside. Has anybody seen the remote? Because I can't get access because based on where the CNO is sitting. Well, much to my demise, the remote is the only thing that operates the machine because when I push play on the front of it, I can't push. I mean, it's not playing the videos. And so my boss, in front of his boss and all these retired four stars, has to go through an hour-long presentation without non-videos. Of course, you know how that made me feel. I felt lower than a snail, and he's giving me the eye. And I've obviously met the CNO a number of times being in his office with my boss. The CNO is giving me eyes, and every four-star in there is just making me feel like trash. Obviously, it's the lowest part of my career. I'm thinking I'm going to get fired. I'm going to get kicked out of the Navy, and my career is over, and life is done. Admiral, and the professional that he is, he finishes the brief without the videos. Life is good. And then we depart, right? I've got to go past that sea of, senior officers. They all know something went wrong. We have to go down 2 floors, down a ladder, the steps to get back to the office. And somehow, some way, the word got back to our front office, and there's 5 people in the front office, that something went awry. And they were giving me the look like, what happened, Abe? What happened? So the admiral walks into the office. He goes in, and I go to my desk, which is right next to his office, and I'm just waiting for my career to end on the spot. And this guy, what you got to know about Admiral Kendall Pease is he's 6'4", huge. He played football at the Naval Academy. He was a quarterback behind Roger Staubach. He's got this big, booming personality and voice. And next thing I hear is, Albritton, get in here, shut the door. Of course, I know my life is over, right? I get in there, I shut the door, and I sit down. He starts laughing. He says, I know you did the right thing. Let's just sit here. I'm going to drop some books. We're going to make something happen. And when you leave out of here, you don't say a damn thing, and you leave early. And when you come back here tomorrow, you don't say a damn thing. And that was it,
Yeah.
right? He knew that I was already at my lowest of lows, and he did not have to react to that, even though I embarrassed him in front of his boss and all these, 25, four-star admirals. But he had enough trust and confidence in me that I'd shown him in previous times that I was capable, and he gave me the benefit of the doubt. And obviously my career went on to flourish, and, I went on and got promoted, but ended up getting out after about 10 years. But I learned something in that moment about responding versus reacting from that moment, which was the lowest of low in my career, that he could have actually just tamped down on me and made it even worse, but he chose not to. So that was a perfect example for how you respond in a very positive way. Now,
so before you get into that next story, I want to pull some things out of there. One is just the fact that you have a story related to VHS tapes is hilarious in a lot of ways. You don't
tells
look
you how
near
old I am, Wes.
So I asked in the chat box if anybody else has VHS tapes at your house and which ones. I remember a Michael Jordan "Come Fly with Me" VHS tape that I used to watch before every basketball game that I played, and it got to the point where you could hardly see it because I had watched it so many times over and over again. But you bring up a couple things that I want to pull out of that story before you move into the next one, and I'd love to kind of maybe this time we usually don't do this, but the other way to kind of we've got a lot of people on the call today and a good number of people who registered too. I'd love to hear as David tells his next story, what are some of the practical things that allowed the leader he's talking about to respond to respond in a way that wasn't reactionary? There's lots of things that cause us to gain just a heightened level of anger or frustration on something. In this case, and in many cases, as a leader, we look at things and we say, this is a stupid problem for us to have. With everything we have going on, with all the complications that we're doing, the fact that we can't get a VHS tape to play is a stupid problem for us to have in some ways. And I know we hear a lot from clients in regards to that's what drives them nuts. I'd love to hear, again, we already got some people putting it in there. What are some practical things that you know of in regards to how that leader was able to respond in that way, in that moment? And we'll talk some about that towards the end of this. David will give some examples, but would love to hear first kind of from some of the people who are on in the chat box there. So anyway, just wanted to kind of tee that up as you move into your second story for us. So please go ahead.
No, thanks a lot. So fast forward about 10 years, I'm out of the Navy now. I'm in my corporate career as a corporate public relations, person. I'm working for a large defense company in the DC area. And I'm a director now, director level. In the pipeline to become a vice president of this company. Life is going well, doing well in my career. We had new team members join the team, and we all had disparate backgrounds and those types of things. And we had a person come on the team who had been a Wall Street Journal reporter, phenomenal career, Pulitzer Prize winner, had a lot of great relationships across the industry with CEO level people, and she knew everything. She knew a lot, and she was very smart, very capable. But she let us know that she was very smart and very capable. We heard it a lot. And so everything became, well, you guys don't know anything, and I know it. And, for 6 months, that's what we heard. And it was building up with me and building up with me. And, so we had 6 business lines. I had line of sight into one of the business lines as a corporate guy supporting the vice president of communications for that business. She had international, line of sight. And this particular business was doing a huge $1 billion international pursuit. And so we had a strategic meeting to, kind of eke out the communication strategy. And unfortunately, she missed that meeting. And so, we made some decisions because we had a short timeline, and I gave her an update. I sent an update afterwards just because. And much to my chagrin, she disagreed with the strategic direction that the vice president of communications for that business actually ultimately approved. Next morning, her office is next to mine. I'm in my office, ironically reading the Wall Street Journal about 7:30 in the morning. She comes in my office, closes the door behind me, and we got to know about her. She's about 5'2", from New York, dropping curse words left and right. That's her style. And she starts cursing. F, you guys F this up, and I can't believe, and you guys are so stupid, and blah, blah, blah. Well, I had enough at that point, and I reacted instead of responding. And I stood up, and if you can tell, I'm a pretty big guy. I'm 6'2", I'm about 250. And I slammed my hand down on the table, and I said, "I'm tired of this. Don't you ever come in here screaming at me again." And we got into it. Well, the strength of my voice obviously overtook hers, and she walked out of the office crying. I felt terrible about that. That was not my intention, but I was fed up. She called the chief communications officer, our boss, and actually out of that, my story never got told that, she was in my office screaming at me to predicate all this. All that was heard was that I screamed at her, made her cry. Well, the ultimate result from that reaction was that at my performance evaluation for the end of that year, I lost $50,000 in bonus that year. Mm-hmm. And the whole conversation of me becoming a vice president inside that company went away. It dried up just like that. So that reaction cost me a lot, cost me financially, it cost me from a career progression perspective. Thankfully, I recovered well. I went to my next company, became a VP of communications, and then I went on to become a chief communications officer and business president, some other things, some other companies. But it was that choice in that moment where I reacted instead of responded that cost me dearly. Thankfully, she and I recovered. We're still great friends today, those types of things. But in that moment of reaction, I did not think clearly. I needed to, in that moment, think about, responding instead of reacting, and I chose the latter. And that cost me dearly. And that's something that we need to think about, because when you think about leadership, right? Leadership, like Russ West said, leadership is what you do. It's how people react to you is what's most important. We see the lens of the world this way, and that's important for us in the moment. But everybody else that engages with us is grading our papers based on our engagement and how we react or respond. If we respond smartly, you can diffuse or derail a negative situation versus reacting immediately and viscerally and creating a kerfuffle that's going to negative react, long-term and short-term relationships, or have negative outcomes that you didn't intend because of how you reacted.
Yeah. That's good. So we've got some great comments in the chat box. So if you're not watching that chat box, I would encourage you to. We've got some folks who dropped in some really interesting thoughts as you were telling those stories. It reminds me I need to get people telling more stories on these, because it really stirs a lot of insights from all the folks who are joining live and add some value along the way. So I want you to begin getting after what is the typical approach. So we know there's a space, hopefully, in between stimulus and response, right? There's a space in there, and it's what we do in that space and how we're able to allocate time to calm down in that space, whatever those is. Could you just kind of articulate what's conventional wisdom as it relates to not reacting and responding? What's conventional wisdom? We've heard the old adages of count to five, all those kind of things. And maybe compare that to, or articulate some things we know about how the best leaders prepare themselves to not be reactionary and respond better. So if you could kind of compare and contrast conventional wisdom versus, what we know about that.
No, that's a great point, Wes. Like you said, the count to 10, count to 5, take deep breaths, step away from the situation. I mean, all of those aren't wrong, right? But what they are insufficient, because all they're doing is kind of treating the symptom of the problem rather than the root cause of the issue, right? So it assumes, okay, so let's say you're going to count to 10, right? We are all used to immediate responses. What's made us successful in a corporate context or anything is our ability to immediately respond to something, handle the problem, and keep moving. Right. In a disagreement or something like that, you don't always necessarily feel like you have that time. And so when you aren't addressing the root cause, you kind of feel compelled to have an immediate answer, or perhaps you just personally haven't developed the muscle memory, if you will, to inquire about something before you respond to something. Or you haven't looked at yourself in the mirror and said, what is my specific trigger? that makes me respond or react in a certain way. Okay. So these are things we need to understand about ourselves. And many times that we don't. I mean, we just don't. If you look at this through an admired leadership lens, then, our goal isn't really to eliminate our emotional reactions because we are first human beings, right? We are all
Right.
going to have visceral reactions to things. But what we want to do is develop consistent behaviors that create a space between the trigger or something that happened and the response that we're going to get. And so, what we're not trying to automatically do is equal an answer in the immediate. What we're trying to do is become an excellent problem solver, but, without, fully grasping the full context of what's going on, we are reducing our ability to answer smartly in a right context so that we keep problems out of the context between the two individuals that are involved or the larger group. So what we can do is develop the habit of asking one or two or three questions before we involve. We engage, right? So what that does is create that natural space, if you will,
Yeah.
that you can learn more about the context for how that person is engaging with you in that moment. Another best practice from an admired leadership perspective is throwing the problem back at that person. Because if somebody's going to bring you an issue and they feel a certain way about it, then if you ask them for more context about how and why they feel that way, it gives you a little time to reflect and understand their context. So you can ask better questions to go deeper and give yourself some time and space in your head to actually respond smartly as well. One trick that you can do with that in that context is to just default to a response such as, you know what? Tell me more about that. Well, tell me why more, say more about why you're saying like that. Because they're emotionally charged right then. And if you now throw that back at them, that gives you more time to reflect. Okay. And so
I like
that's just a way from an admired leadership perspective to think about giving yourself some space and grace that allows for more understanding and context building before you respond.
That's awesome. I love the thoughts and insights that are coming in the chat box during all of that too, and I love what everyone said, but agree with Brian as well. Charlie saying agreement in Brian too, who said, you assume positive intent. I've had that framed another way before of always thinking what's the most generous assumption I can make, and sometimes that frame of mind will lead to the questions you need to ask. I also love what you said, David, is leaders do not always have the natural margin of time in between when something happens to them and that trigger and their ability to steal away and count to 10 or whatever that is. So the habit or the best practice of getting into a behavior that says when that stimulus or that trigger hits, it's your job as the leader to create that space. It's not going to be created for you. And one of the ways the most admired leaders in the world do that is their immediate response. They're in the habit of asking questions. They're in the habit of asking really great questions in those moments, and that creates that space for them that they need to both calm down, build more context, and respond effectively. That's what we talk about in everything that we do. What's the practical things that are universal across the board that span across every psychometric, every industry, every single demographic across the board. The leaders who create a habit in themselves to ask questions as a response to anything that triggers them. That's really powerful. So usually we offer a 10-minute kind of interaction with a coach for our live attendees. Sophie, you can go ahead and drop that in the chat box too if you want to, if anybody would like to have a little follow-up. But in addition to that, David's offered to drop his own information in the chat box too. So David, I don't know if you've got that handy. You could drop
I
that in the
do.
chat box. And you can follow up with David specifically if you'd like to. He's offered that. And let me tell you, I would highly recommend, even if it's a bit of an email exchange to give him some context. David, I'd like to end here, and then you can take this however you want. We got a great question that kind of flips the script a bit on this conversation. I think it'd be a good place to end. This person says, "I'm curious for thoughts on whether a leader's judicious show of pique might be motivating under occasional circumstances. This particular individual is one of our subscribers, very familiar with our content, and says the My Impatience with Results module comes to mind, which
That's
those of you
good.
who are subscribers, that'd be a great one to revisit as we move forward. But is there any circumstances where actually reacting with, I love how they articulated a judicious show of pique and intentional high reaction is motivational under circumstances? What would
No,
you
that's
say
a
for that?
great question because I reflect on growing up in my household. My mother's looks would tell me everything about everything that I
Right.
just did. She didn't have to
That's
say
right.
a word, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes the look, sometimes it's the frame of, okay, are you really asking me this? Or that sometimes just indicates, all right, you're barking up the wrong tree here, mister. Let's calm down. And so, yes, those types of reactions, the nonverbals can say a lot.
Mhm.
Now, you have to think about, the scale of that as well, because you don't want to
Yeah.
tip too far to one side or the other, because you can negatively affect an outcome in that as well. Again, people are reacting to you in every circumstance. They're grading your papers. They're looking at how you're going to react or respond. But sometimes just the indication without saying anything like, you should really rethink this point of view or this
Yeah.
perspective is sometimes helpful, just to
Yeah.
maybe quell some, misunderstandings or allow them some time to maybe think about the problem a little differently and come back to you.
That's good. Let me ask you to dig a little deeper. You said it was your mom that could do the look.
Oh
What
yeah,
what
yeah,
what else did your mom do leading up to the look that made that so powerful? Because those a lot of times those peak responses, or that look of immense frustration or anger, even if it is a look or whatever it is, or it's a show of intense frustration and anger used correctly, absolutely can be motivational, can be very correcting, can be incredible feedback that you're giving to individuals at their time. But those only land when that leader has done some things ahead of that time, right?
absolutely right.
So
Yeah, I think one
what
of the
comes
great
to, I
things my
wasn't going to
mom
ask you
was
that, but
No, I think one
yeah,
of
go
the great
ahead.
things my mom was great at was setting expectations. Here's my expectations of you, how you behave, how you act in public, what you do in school and all those types of things. If you think about it in a broader context from a corporate perspective and, the job, nobody intentionally comes to work intending to screw up, right? Most communications, issues happens because we don't have good solid communications. Expectations were not set. There was not a clear understanding and those types of things. And if there's not, then people are off, operating on lack of information or something like that. And that can create questions or actions or, situations that are unclear. And so that, forms how they behave, how they believe about something, or maybe, unintended consequences and all those types of things. The better as a leader that you can explain your intentions, what the expectations are for people, you reduce the amount of misunderstanding and the need to actually have that look, a little sideways, like you really are you're barking up the wrong tree here. And so it's incumbent upon us as leaders to do a better job on the front end, as you were alluding to truly explain expectations up front to really reduce misunderstanding.
That's awesome. That's strong, David. My immense appreciation for our chat box people today. Well, I don't know what you did, David, but it stirred up a lot of great conversation that has added a lot of value. I'm looking forward to going back, and I haven't even been able to read all the comments that have come in and insights and things as y'all share in the background. Sophie, if you would, one more link that I'd love for you to drop is the events page. Just want to give everybody a kind of some motivation and some inspiration to go to that page. Not only can you see there all of the webinars and topics that we have coming up for the rest of the year, but we are just this week beginning to launch all of our on location events. So these are complimentary events that we're doing all over the nation. And as of today, we're going to be in Madison, Wisconsin. We are going to be in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we're going to be in Atlanta. We have about probably 5 more on location events that are coming up, but all of those are ready to register today. So we'd love for you to head to that page. We'd love to get to meet some of you guys in person along the way too. David, any final closing remarks, encouragement for all of our leaders on the call today or potentially listening to this recording?
No, we appreciate everybody's engagement. I too look forward to seeing the comments. Would love to connect live with some folks. If you have questions, please feel free to email me. Just in everything that we do, think about the broader context. One thing, being a public relations communications guy for so many years, dealing with as many media as I used to, one trick as I used to do media training is as you think about, things and you get asked questions, you get asked a question. Remember that you owe them a response, not necessarily an answer to their question. Think about the
Mm,
difference in the frame with those two. Think about how much consternation you can, remove when you put your broader context in it with more information versus, maybe something they're asking that they don't have full context, and so their question is misinformed. When you respond in a very meaningful way, you can deflate a lot of balloons that, would otherwise be a negative outcome in that instance.
awesome. And just one final remark, we had somebody ask David how we can connect with you. So I scrolled back up, and I think you dropped in the chat box to host and panelists only. So I've re-put David's email
Oh, thank you
back
for
to
that.
everyone. So we'll leave that open here for just a bit so you can grab it as well. David, appreciate you so much, all that you add to
Thank
our
you,
firm,
everybody.
all that you add to our client base as well. Hope you have a great rest of the day, and everybody have a fabulous weekend. We'll see you in the next one. See you. Bye.
Take care, everyone.
Cheers.